Hi, this is Dee, Assistant Director of Alumni Career Engagement. Welcome to Alumni Zoom Trips, a series of pre-recorded interviews with USD alumni experts about how to navigate the long-term impact of COVID-19 on our communities and workplaces. This program is co-hosted with the Office of Alumni Relations. Rachel Lincoln joins us today from Spain, where she teaches multiple subjects to elementary schoolers in Sevilla. Rachel also teaches young students in China and is in the process of completing her graduate study in international education at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Rachel holds a bachelor's in liberal studies from USC's College of Arts and Sciences and has earned her multiple subjects teaching credential as an undergrad from the School of Leadership and Education Sciences.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You have a fascinating background spanning multiple countries. So can you tell our listeners about how you got started in your career and what led you to explore international teaching jobs?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2015 from USD with a multiple subject credential, and I did my student teaching at a school in San Diego in San Ysidro district called Hocking Charter School, and that led to a full-time position. So I taught for 3 years in third grade there. It's a project-based learning STEAM school. And in addition to that, mostly all of my students were traveling across the border or had parents who spoke Spanish, and a lot of them were second language learners. So I was really interested in developing my Spanish skills. In addition, I had always wanted to live abroad, work abroad, study abroad. And after not being able to do that in my years at USD, when most people do a study abroad experience, I had a desire to do a master's or do something abroad. So I started looking into programs. And I had a friend who was also interested in moving, and he was looking at Spain. So we did some research. We found out there's a lot of programs in Spain that want assistance for English classrooms, because Spain had a little bit of a late start in learning English after Franco. They were not allowed to have any kind of English in the classroom, on television, for the whole time Franco was in office. So after that, they've been trying to make up for lost time in learning English, and now there's a whole slew of programs. The one that I'm doing now is called Auxiliares de Conversación. So it's language assistance. It's through the government, and through this we are given it's it's kind of a loophole. So it's a student grant that's our salary, but we're on a student visa, and our hours in the classroom as an assistant counts as our practicum hours, like our internship hours for the student visa. So that's how we are able to live and work in Spain as English teachers. And I'm in the position where I have teaching experience, so it made that all the more easier. But most of the students, or most of the people who do this program, are graduates just out of college with no teaching experience. The only requirement is that you have to be a native English speaker and have a degree.
Okay. So let me see if I understood it correctly. It's a Spanish government-sponsored program?
Yes.
Okay. And how long is the visa for?
It's for the school year, so technically 9 months.
Okay. And what do you hope to be doing after your visa expires?
So I'm continuing this. This will be my third year teaching as an assistant, but that's why I'm taking on the international education master's, because I'm hoping that I can use my teaching credential and this master's to get a job in an international school, teaching more than just English.
Okay. And how does that work? So how can American citizens interested in teaching find jobs in Spain? Do they need a special visa? Or a special permit?
So the process is a little more complicated to get a work visa. That's why most of the people, including teachers who have the credentials, continue as an assistant, because it's so much easier to get the student visa and go through these programs. The thing is, you're limited in your responsibility. You're not the full teacher. Although depending on which school you're in, sometimes the teachers will leave you in the classroom and you're leading the class on your own. So in my school, they knew I was a teacher, and even though they were there, they let me run the classroom. But I have a lot of friends who they just sat in the back of the classroom and didn't really feel useful. So it depends on the school, and no matter what your situation is, you find the way to make the best of it and contribute what you can. Ask for support if you're not getting enough of it. But in general, the process for becoming a teacher, a full-time teacher, means you either have to have a work visa, which requires residency, or a company to sponsor you to pay for the process and do all the paperwork. And because of the financial situation in Spain, many of the companies are not as willing to do that. So if you're in an international school, you'll have more luck. They contract native speakers. So I'm hoping with a master's in international education, I'll have a leg up and can find something in that.
Okay, yes, that's really helpful to know. And for teaching jobs for foreigners, do they need to get additional accreditation that is locally based? How does that work?
If you want to teach in a public school in Spain, at least, you have to have a degree from Spain, even if you have all the credentials from your home country. But the private sector is more lenient. It's just an issue of if they're willing to pay for the work visa.
Sure. And how is it different living and working in Spain versus here?
The lifestyle is the biggest thing. In America, we're very focused on taking the next step on the ladder and constantly working. I think in Spain, it's a much slower pace of life. They really value their breaks and personal time, social time. The work schedule and the school schedule is 9 to 11, and at 11 o'clock you take a breakfast. They call it tomar un café, or un pan con tomate, which is toast with tomato. So that's at 11. And then at 1 to 3, you have a lunch break, so 2 hours for lunch. And then you finish at 5. And this is for the kids, and most adults follow the similar schedule at their work unless it's an international company.
So it sounds like it's the same amount of hours of break as it is work time, right? Or maybe
just about.
Even more.
Yeah, yes.
And how about, yeah, no, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah.
No, continue.
Okay. Okay, that's really interesting. And what does it look like to succeed in teaching careers in Spain? What are some key skills that you can list?
Well, I think teaching in general, no matter where you are, it can be interpreted so many different ways. I think it's hard to evaluate. Like in some jobs, you might be able to evaluate the product and was it effective or was it not? In teaching, we always look at the student. Are they happy? Are they safe? Are they moving up academically and emotionally? There's so many aspects to it, but something that I can't remember who said this, but I listened to a TED Talk and they were like the sparkling eyes and the aha moments, and that's always stuck with me. Just the moments where you see your kids engaged, curious, and their eyes sparkle because they're so interested, and the moments where they have that light bulb turn on and it's a eureka. They figured it out on their own. So I learned that in my first year especially. I wanted everything to be perfect and novel, and I reinvented the wheel, which you shouldn't do. But I learned that it's not about all of my efforts. It's what the kids get out of it, and I should be focusing on making sure that they're learning from the situation, that they have that aha moments. So giving them the opportunities to figure it out. You don't have to have it all figured out ahead of time.
Absolutely. And how is the classroom structure different, and the student profile? How does it differ from the US?
In Spain, the schools I have worked in and everyone I've talked to in their experience here in the education system, it's very test driven, very test heavy. And in addition to that, with the change of the political sphere, change of government, the curriculum changes as well. So there's very little consistency for students, and teachers have to constantly adapt to a new kind of, if we change the Common Core state standards every year, it's constantly changing. So I think that's put a lot of pressure on teachers who want to be good and give students a consistent learning experience. And in some cases, it's led to just some acceptance with this is how things are and make do with it. So that's something I've kind of not appreciated in my experience here, but it's something that's making me want to possibly go into education reform if I decide to stay in Spain long term.
Okay, that's very interesting, because
Yeah.
you wouldn't, and it's, you know, I can imagine it's very labor intensive for the teachers as well, because they have to constantly innovate and improvise and change their content depending on, you know, these modifications in the curriculum. I want to go back to something you said in, you know, earlier on in our conversation about you finding these opportunities in Spain with, you know, with a friend. How can you walk us through, how did that happen? I mean, did you utilize online research? How did you identify those opportunities to start with?
Yes, we did a lot of online research, and there are a lot of blogs, because the websites, the official websites for auxiliares de conversación, are not as helpful. So all of our information was found through YouTube bloggers and travel bloggers, and I can share the websites that I collected. They're 3 years old now, but I can get more updated information and pass that to you as well.
That would be
The other
lovely.
program that I recommend is Beta. It's the private sector of Auxiliares de Conversación, and it's a much more supportive sector. So I did that my first 2 years, but they're more limited in placements. So now that I'm in Sevilla, I had to switch programs. And it's working out so far, but that's because I know the drill and I have all these resources at my fingertips. But I think it's been so helpful in the online community, meeting people on Facebook through all the web pages. So I'll share those resources too.
Thank you so much. And once you do, I'm happy to share it with all of our listeners through our YouTube channel. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Now, my next question is about your interest in graduate work, and then your sort of choice of Australia and University of Melbourne as a college. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, of how you found that program and why Australia and why that particular program?
I grew up in Arizona, and then I moved to San Diego, and that was surprisingly kind of a culture shock for me too. And then moving to Spain, I love being open-minded and learning how other people do things. And I think it's so important in education that we're not stuck in one way of doing things. So in some of my professional development, I've looked at John Hattie, who was a researcher from the University of Melbourne. And there's just been a lot of more modern education research coming out of the institute there, and Australian education in general. So before I was looking at Spain, I was looking at doing a master's over there, and it was too expensive to get the visa and to pay for schooling there. So I found this program, which is all online, and it's actually targeted for the IB program. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the International Baccalaureate. So it's international education, and at the end you also get your credential in being an IB teacher. So I figured that would be helpful no matter where I go, and we'll see. So far I'm loving the curriculum. It's very much inquiry-based learning, which I think is where education is moving, in my opinion, where it should be moving in the next years.
And can you tell me a little bit more, kind of open that up? What is inquiry-based learning?
Basically, it's putting education in the hands of the student. So instead of everything being teacher-driven, lecture-driven, kind of the traditional model that we're used to, inquiry learning can be project-based learning. It can be like scientific investigations, but it starts with the inquiry of the student. So something that they're curious about, and then you expand on that question And obviously, it takes a little more planning and familiarity with the content that you're supposed to teach as a teacher, to be able to match those standards with what the kids are interested in. But the end product is something that they are engaged in and that is useful, as opposed to just doing something because you have to in order to pass the test and move on to the next stage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that. It even sounds like it's a co-created content too, right? Because you're doing
Definitely.
it in collaboration in conjunction with your students.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just out of curiosity, I'm slightly going off our in script, and I apologize for that. But in your classes at the university in Melbourne, how's the class, like is the class composed of a lot of international students such as yourself? Okay, I'm curious about that too.
That's been one of my other favorite things. Everything's online, so each week it's a Zoom meeting with 20 other teachers who are located around the world, and the majority of them are in Australia, but a lot of them are from the Pacific Islands. So we have some in Vietnam, and then there's Japan, China. There's a few in the Middle East. I think I am the furthest west of the students. So it's been really interesting seeing everyone's cultural perspectives and different interpretations of the IB around the world.
And is it a 2-year program, a 2-year master's program?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
2-year part-time, 1-year full-time.
Okay. And did you need to take any knowledge assessment exams, like things like the GRE or no?
No, I'll just, I can't remember if you had to have, I think you had to previous teacher experience, or if not, some kind of proof that you've done like your practicum, and then other than that, your teaching degree.
Okay, awesome. Now, what advice can you share with those who want to go into education, particularly international education?
Well, into international education, if we're talking more, the attributes that you need to have is to be open-minded. And then credential-wise, I think that depends on each country. In Spain, it's more complicated. I think your best option to come teach in Spain is to start with the assistant program. Although I also know that if you want to work on a military base, there's options there, and international schools too. There's a few fairs every year, international, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's the International Teaching or International Schools fair, and they recruit teachers to teach around the world in their international schools. But if you want to go through the regular systems in place in each country, it gets a little more complex. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a typical day on the job for you, and how it's changed since COVID?
Yes. In Spain or in America?
In Spain.
In Spain.
I think this audience will be really interested in international, your international experience. So we can focus on Spain.
Okay. In Spain, I was lucky in that I had a placement with teachers who were very experienced. I had very little work I had to do outside of the classroom. So I would go in at 9 and I taught 2 classes. I was in the primary grade, so I worked from first grade through 3rd grade classrooms. And I had a lot of resources from teaching 3rd grade in America. So it was kind of adapting those to just fit the English curriculum. My favorite activity I would do is mini teacher, where I'd have a PowerPoint that one kid each day would go up and walk through asking typical questions like, what's the weather like? And what letter is it? And then they'd pick a song at the end that everyone would do. And that took up like a good chunk of the classes that I would do. And then something tied to the content. So then we would have our break. And that's 11 to 11:30. At 1, we would have the lunch break. And I usually use that time to go work out because you only need an hour for a workout, an hour for lunch. It was perfect. And 2 more hours of class. And then after, most of the assistants here also do private classes. So I would do usually 1 hour with just one student at their house. So I'd walk there and then I'd walk home. In Madrid, the public transit was amazing. I used it my first year because up until you're 25, it only costs $20 to have an unlimited Metro card. So that's the subway there. And when I turned 26, I decided I'm centrally located. I'm going to get my exercise, and I walked everywhere. I never used the Metro. So that was a typical day. I think I would leave the house at 8 and I would get home at 8. But it was full of different things. I never felt like it was too much work because they have all their breaks. So
wonderful. And it looks like you're really able to balance your family, your work life, and your personal life too, which is wonderful, right? Because they're so it seems like they're so segmented. Now, can you sort of run me through how it was in the US? I'm actually going to take back what I stated earlier because I have to see how the two compare now.
The comparison is striking. In the US, I probably was what you would call a workaholic.
Yeah.
Yes. Especially in the first years, I think everyone knows, and if you don't, I'm telling you now that just expect to put in a lot of hours as a first and second year teacher and expect to fail a lot and have those support systems and self-care rituals in place and adhere to them religiously. Otherwise, you will burn out. You will burn out. So my first year, I would wake up at 5:30. I would commute down to Chula Vista area, right near the border. I'd prepare in my classroom for an hour at least before the kids came in at 8. And then our break was 15 minutes for recess, and half hour for lunch, and we would finish at 3. So it's a longer school day, although we finish a little bit earlier. I think the 2-hour lunch break is amazing because it allows you and the kids to take a break, run, get their energy out. And a lot of them do their after school activities in that 2-hour break as opposed to after school, which kind of breaks up the day. So.
And then you said you would finish at 3 o'clock in the US. Would that be the end of class time? I mean, would you be able to finish as well, or would you?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So that was the end of class, but I would usually stay until 6. I had a lot of friends who they stayed just for their contracted hours, and they would leave at 4. But as soon as I went home, I didn't want to have to continue working, so I tried to finish everything at school. Although when they had someone come, a physical trainer, and do workouts with us at 4, starting my second year. So I would do that, and that really helps. It forced me to have that self-care that I am now mandating for all teachers.
Okay. Against this background, do you think you'll ever come back to work in the US?
I love the schedule here, and I love that they take their time, but sometimes it drives me crazy too. And there's times where there's something we need to do, like plan for the first day of school, and I just don't feel like anyone else is taking it seriously. They're like, it's time for break. I'm like, I will not be able to leave this behind and be stress-free until I finish this. So there's different mentalities that I'm still not able to kind of wrap my head around. And I think America has, it's more advanced in their teaching styles. So I bring that into the classroom as much as I can. And I think Spain is trying. It's a little bit behind after they had a very long period under a dictatorship with Franco, which it has a ripple effect in everything else, in their English level, in reform. So that's definitely apparent too.
It sounds like it's going to take a little bit of time, right, for them to modernize their educational system.
Yes.
Yeah, introduce those modifications.
But it is changing. It's just slow.
Right. And how would you say your USD degree has prepared you in a career in international teaching?
Well, all these values that I learned about being open-minded and that came from my USD experience. As for the teaching, I did my degree in liberal studies. with a math and music concentration, and then I got my teaching credential, and that was all within 4 years. I don't know if the program is still exactly laid out the same way, but I think it did an excellent job of preparing me. I had some friends who did the graduate program in 1 year, and they felt like it was not enough time to really be in the classroom, experiencing what it's like there, and learning from the material. So I like how mine was paced out. I think the best thing you can do is get in the classroom and keep all those supports around you. Don't let go of the teachers or the colleagues you made, because you're going to want to refer back to them in your first few years of teaching. A lot of times you might feel on your own in the classroom, so keeping those support systems, that was crucial for me.
And where do you see the industry, the education industry sort of heading, both here and abroad?
Well, I think Spain's slowly catching up to what America and Australia are doing. But in general, I think this time of the pandemic is going to change a lot. And I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I think we're seeing the positive and negatives of online learning. And constant technology usage in our lives. So I think we might see more flipped classrooms, which is an educational term for kind of what we're doing now. It's where you pre-teach the material with videos, and then you have a session which is more just support for kids who need to practice, and you can give feedback, and then you end with another kind of conclusion video. I think that's being used a lot now, and I think that a lot of teachers are seeing the benefits of that. However, I think we're all learning how valuable being in person with the students is too, and having the social connections. I don't think students are able to really grow fully in all areas if they're not able to be with other students interacting. So I think more group style learning, hopefully more inquiry learning, my passion, will be where education is heading.
It's really interesting you said that, which sort of made me think of, because of COVID and because it's been the impact, it's been prolonged already, right? And it looks like it's going to be even more pervasive. And so, will the way that students learn change as a result of, this focus on technology and focus on distance learning? What do you think? Do you think the way that we absorb information, we learn information will change in response to what we've been experiencing post-COVID?
Maybe. I'm seeing now with a lot of my friends who are taking up their own professional learning, and with my students too, they're getting a little more independent, and learning how to find what they need, be more resourceful, and not just rely on everything to be spoon fed. So yeah, maybe in that sense, it will be a good kind of wake up call on how we can transfer and continue this, but within a group personal setting too. So before you decide to move abroad, it's important you make sure you have a 5-year window after getting your teaching credential to clear it in California. And usually the program is 2 years. I did one that was 1 year, but I don't think it's being offered anymore. It's in your second year of teaching, you have to start this clear credential program. So I did that in my second year. By my third year, I was done, and then I decided to go to Spain. But if you leave and you decide to stay for more than 5 years in another country, and you haven't used your preliminary teaching credential, you might lose all of that work you've done. So make sure you check that box is checked before you leave, or make sure that you plan to come back to clear your credential before the 5-year window is up.
Okay, thanks so much for that helpful information.
Yes.
And as a final note, what's next for you?
Oh, well, now I'm in Sevilla, and I'm going to continue working as an assistant in 2 different schools. That's a total of 12 hours. And I'm continuing to teach online to the private students that I had in Madrid, which I've been doing all throughout the pandemic. Most of them are adults in professional settings, so it's just conversation, and those are my favorite hours. And then I'll continue teaching my students in China. This is through a platform called VIP Kid, and for anyone who is credentialed in teaching, you have a leg up, but anyone who's a native speaker too can apply for this. And if you're stuck at home, actually, if you don't have a job in this time, anyone can do VIP Kid or any of the online English teaching programs I recommend, because it's very flexible. You plan your own hours, and you don't have to have any kind of credentials for it. So I've been doing that. And then this month I've opened my own academy through a sports club here. So I'm teaching small groups of primary students and secondary students English there too.
You are definitely busy. And it's wonderful to see that you were able to fill in all of those siestas and breaks and all of that in a very constructive way. And thank you also for sharing. Was it VIP?
VIP Kid.
Okay.
I can send you a list of all the online teaching programs too.
Because I'm thinking that, because of COVID, so many people are now in search of new opportunities and things that they can do from the comfort of wherever they are. Without the extra learning and credentialing requirements would be just amazing. So thank you for sharing that insight as well.
Definitely.
And Rachel, it's been so delightful getting to know you, and thank you so much for sharing your advice and your experience with our listeners.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was nice to meet you.
It was wonderful to meet you.